One after another, the laws of physics have been rewritten, the theories of life itself revised. As science and technology radically change our lives for better and for worse, we are reminded once more that in much wisdom there is grief. Toward the future, this time on the Western tradition.
And now UCLA professor Eugen Weber's continuing journey through the history of Western civilization.
Last time we saw how modern technology made everyday life easier for normal people, easier than it had ever been before. But there was another even greater revolution in the 20th century, one that has granted humanity a partial reprieve from biological destiny. It was in 1901, for example, that the first Nobel Prizes were awarded. The prize for physics went to Wilhelm Röntgen for his work on X-rays, which some at that time still regarded as a curiosity, no different from moving pictures or balloon ascents. And the prize for medicine that year went to Emil von Behring for his work on diphtheria. Both awards illustrated the spectacular advances being made in medicine, which the 20th century was going to carry still further. In 1899, 100,000 people in England and Wales alone died of infectious diseases. But in our century, vaccination, inoculation, preventive medicine, preventive hygiene would make such swathes of infection obsolete. They cut back tuberculosis. They obliterated smallpox, which had been the scourge of mankind. 200 years ago, 9 Europeans in 10 contracted smallpox, 1 in 7 died from it. Most of the rest were left more or less disfigured. By mid-20th century, this plague was a memory, along with cholera, whooping cough, diphtheria, and after 1954, polio. Our major diseases today go with living longer, like cancer, and living more stressfully, like heart disease. Even AIDS is a gift of better communications and world travel, as syphilis was in the 16th century. Some plagues simply took longer before they disappeared. The transmission of typhus from man to man by lice was discovered in 1909, but the conditions in which this took place couldn't be so easily eliminated. During the First World War, for instance, most Serbian deaths came not from battle, but from typhus. Between 1917 and 1921, the disease hit some 25 million in Soviet territories, and it caused 3 million deaths. As famine, misery, and filth receded, so did typhus. The fight against disease was becoming a fight against conditions that would breed disease. Malarial marshes, mosquitoes, malnutrition, dirt. But the fight was also aided by the development of more and more effective drugs, serums, antibiotics, which were much speeded up by the 2 world wars. No less important was general public access to medical care, something extremely rare 100 years ago, when most people could not afford a doctor and one only went to hospital to die. With medical care, mortality declined precipitously, longevity soared. But since nothing is ever clear-cut, the progress of modern medicine and public health brought new problems in its wake. The declining death rate resulted in a huge population increase. Despite dramatically improved crop yields and productivity, due in good part to the synthetic nitrogen fertilizers turned out by a German chemist in 1910, there wasn't enough food to feed all the new people. Although it was more evident in undeveloped countries where hunger and government incompetence and thievery continued as a way of life, the problem was also beginning to be recognized even in the wealthier West. The demographic bomb, however, caused less concern than bombs of other kinds. The summer of 1945 saw the first explosions of controlled atomic devices that could release vast power, whether for good or ill. Accelerated as usual by war, this came as the culmination of research in physics that had been going on since the beginning of the century in Europe. Around 1911, the work of the Curies in France and of Rutherford in England revealed the instability and disintegration of atoms in radioactive substances.
No longer any doubt about it. That uranium is splitting into at least two big parts, and those biggest kicks, nearly 100 million electrons,
which had been believed to be the firm, indivisible base of the material world, atoms could now be split, releasing energy in the process. It was a fundamental tenet of classic theories that light, energy, and matter were both continuous and separate entities. But now, work done in Germany, Denmark, Switzerland, Italy suggested that when bodies emit light, they actually radiate energy pulsating in infinitesimal measures, quanta, proportional to the frequency of a discontinuous radiation. One after the other, the solid notions that paved the floor of science appeared to melt away. A new physics was suggesting new hypotheses about the structure of the universe, of matter, of perception. Picasso's Cubism, Dali's Surrealism reflected this in painting and in sculpture. Freud's emphasis on the unconscious came out in the free association of surrealists and the deliberate, apparent incoherence of someone like James Joyce in literature. The mathematical principles of Isaac Newton, the rationalism, the mechanical determinism of the past 300 years, these were being rewritten into a new relativism. In 1905, Albert Einstein's theory of special relativity suggested that neither time nor space was absolute. There were no absolutes anymore. By 1915, Einstein's general theory of relativity presented matter itself as just one form of energy, and the basic component of matter, the atom, a tiny compound of compressed energy, could turn into light, or into heat, or both. Now, this transmutation of matter into energy, which Rutherford called the new alchemy, this could be set off by bombarding atoms with smaller subatomic particles. In 1932, the first cyclotron was built to accelerate this bombardment, and it was also found that in the case of atoms of certain elements like uranium, their disintegration was accompanied by a chain reaction that went with an intense emission of energy which could be controlled in a nuclear reactor or packaged into a bomb. This was the basis of the 400-pound bomb which destroyed Hiroshima on August the 6th, 1945. Hiroshima, like Guernica in the Spanish Civil War, Hiroshima has become part of history and continues to affect it. The justified terror of what atom bombs could do, and far worse devices also, has played its part in avoiding major conflicts over 40 extremely nervous years. But it has also produced a pervasive anxiety and guilt about man's capacity to destroy mankind, and more specifically about the dangers of science and technology. That anxiety was further spurred when, in 1953, at Cambridge again, James Watson and Francis Crick deciphered the double helix configuration of the molecule of DNA, which determines the structure and the function of every living animal or plant, and which functions like a living computer that tells a cell what protein to make. In other words, what to create and how. In 1972, the theory was put to work when scientists in California managed to split and recombine DNA so as to use it for particular purposes. The step from theory to application had taken half a century in nuclear physics. It took less than 20 years to produce man-made microorganisms. Like atoms bombarded by radioactive rays, man's solid certainties disintegrated under the bombardment of physics, chemistry, biochemistry, astronomy, and indeed geography. The Danish physicist Niels Bohr explained this as early as 1938. Man, said Niels Bohr, no longer lives at the center of the universe surrounded by less fortunate societies on the edge of some abyss. Men and women now share a small spherical planet of one solar system, which is only one small part of much larger systems. This, like the revision of our long-held ideas about space and time, said Bohr, provided a forceful admonition about the relativity of all human judgments. So what you have here is a contemporary replay of the Copernican revolution of 300 years ago, and the anxiety that was voiced by the future Dean of St. Paul's, by John Donne, in the 17th century, is our anxiety, as we can hear. Donne complains that new philosophy calls all in doubt. The element of fire is quite put out. The sun is lost, and the earth, and no man's wit can well direct him where to look for it. And freely men confess that this world spent, when in the planets and the firmament they seek so many new, then see that this is crumbled out again to his atomies. It's all in pieces, all coherence gone, all just supply and all relation. Now that is done in 1611, but it could just as well be the 1980s, except that it rhymes, which no poetry would do today. In any case, here we are in the 20th century with a lot of people already a bit lonely in a godless world, and now they are denied not only God, but the solid substance of judgments and perceptions. The world had always been disgracefully mismanaged, but now you no longer knew to whom to complain. The answer to this predicament was suggested by a philosopher from France in a lecture of 1945. Jean-Paul Sartre put forward what he described as a new humanism and which he called existentialism. Condemned to freedom and to loneliness, Sartrean man finds that his condition can be transcended by himself alone as he endows life, events, above all himself, with a meaning that he must weave out of his own resources. Looking around at a world in which he finds neither faith nor normative values, Sartre rejects despair for an affirmation arising precisely from despair, but leading to choice, to action, to the creation of one's own destiny. Of course, in our new age of disposable fashions, even philosophies are built to self-destruct. No one today thinks much of existentialism, yet it reflects the practice, if not the principle, of our times. Certainly, even if he does not like it, man continues to recreate his destiny at an accelerated pace. One example of this is the computer, which is simply a high-speed calculator with an electronic memory. During the war, the British built the first electronic computer because they wanted to use it to break enemy codes. The first civilian counterpart of this was unveiled in the United States in 1946. It weighed 30 tons, it filled the space of a two-car garage, and it contained 18,000 vacuum tubes, which failed at the rate of 1 every 7 minutes. By the 1980s, one pea-size silicon chip delivers the same amount of computing power, and any home computer costing $100 or less can outperform what cost $500,000 20 years ago. Computers have radically affected our lives for good or ill and cannot be jettisoned short of catastrophe. So, science and technology have changed the ways of life, but not the nature nor the passions of mankind. After a century spent arguing that problems can be solved by science, by reason, or by acts of will, we have to admit that some problems can't be solved, or that their solution leaves more problems in its wake, something that Ecclesiastes apparently knew a long, long time ago. There are not that many people who read the Bible these days, which is the epitome of wisdom and violence and the high aspirations and the hurtful achievements of mankind. So I cannot tell how many of you have read Ecclesiastes. But this is what the preacher says. For in much wisdom there is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. For who knows what is good for men in this life? Who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? So here in the 3rd century before Christ, The Hebrew sage suggests that all is vanity and vexation of spirit, and I'm sure he wasn't the first to say so. So some things have changed, and other things haven't changed at all. But if we still don't know where we're going, at least we face our predicament, the human predicament, in comfort far greater than Ecclesiastes ever knew. And this is a help. As for the Western tradition, if you perceived such a thing as we proceeded, the most striking thing about the Western tradition is that it is not one, but many. It includes authoritarianism and individualism, personal initiative and centralization, obedience and revolt, faith and questioning, inertia and enterprise, conflict and reconciliation. That's what makes our culture, that's what makes our history so tantalizing, so available for almost any reference you want, a yellow pages of human conduct, of human values. But there are, I think, two constants that you can never miss. One of these is curiosity. The quest that drives some in all times to ask, to search more than most. And the other is ambition, which drives some in all times to press further and to try and achieve more. Really, when you think about it, our patron saint is Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods. And on this note, I shall leave you with some lines from Wordsworth. Still glides the stream and shall forever glide. The form remains, the function never dies, while we, the brave, the mighty, and the wise, we men who in our morn of youth defied the elements, must vanish. Be it so. Enough that something from our hands have power to live and act and serve the future hour, and that as toward the silent tomb we go, through love, through hope, and faith's unending dower, we feel that we are greater than we know.